Big news coming out of Washington, D.C. Jack Smith, the special counsel, has superseded the indictment in the Jan 6th case in front of Judge Tanya Chutkan. That's huge. A lot's going on with that. And it is very different than the other indictment that he was charged with. Now, it's the same. He's the only one charged. They didn't charge the unindicted co-conspirators. And it's the same 4 charges. But it's very different. And why is it very different? Because it's pared down significantly and it's changed due to the immunity decision by the United States Supreme Court that came down almost a month and a half ago now, essentially saying that all official acts that are done by the president he's immune from, and you can't prosecute him for those crimes. There was a lot of speculation about what is Jack Smith going to do given that ruling and given his case, his entire indictment. And there was a discussion of a possible mini trial, like an evidentiary hearing to determine what's official and what's unofficial. That still might happen because there's also evidence that you're not allowed to use, and there are things that are presumption, might be official, might not be official. And Jack Smith took a very aggressive approach to this new superseding indictment. Now, what's a superseding indictment? It's just basically an amended indictment. It's something that prosecutors do when they want to make changes to the indictment. Now, what was interesting is Jack Smith didn't have to supersede, which means go back into the grand jury, present it to a grand jury. He didn't have to do that if all he was doing was Xing out or deleting things from the indictment that was clearly official acts. So that tells us he added things or he changed things, because you can't just change things. You can delete things, you can take things out, but you can't make changes without going back to the grand jury. And you also, because this is something so foundational, it's about immunity. He's not going to go back into and because the Supreme Court told him he had to, he's not going to go back into the same grand jury that was quote unquote infected with evidence and things that were presidential, right? That were his official acts, that were core presidential duties that he's immune from. So he wasn't going to do that. So he had to go to a brand new grand jury, and he did a brand new indictment. And the indictment, like I said, has the same 4 charges and only one defendant. He didn't do the unindicted co-conspirators. There were 6 of them in the first indictment. But here he took out Jeff Clark. He was co-conspirator number 4 because Jeff Clark, if you remember, he was the environmental lawyer who worked for the Department of Justice, but he was on Team Trump that the election was stolen. He was willing to make claims that were fraudulent and lies, and essentially helped Trump steal the election. And so Trump wanted to elevate him and make him acting attorney general after Trump had lost the election and before the inauguration. So when you're supposed to be winding things down and transitioning, he was going to appoint a new attorney general, someone who's not qualified. As I said, he was an environmental attorney, and thankfully, Rich Donahue and the acting attorney general and others basically said, we're going to walk out if you appoint Jeff Clark as attorney general at this stage. And thankfully, Trump didn't do it. But that was still part of the case. That has been taken out completely. And so he's not mentioned in there. Another interesting thing is to get around this whole, is it official act or not? It was anything that's in a presidential capacity was removed as well. And so it talks about candidate Trump as opposed to President Trump. It talks about his personal capacity and him as president. Now, the thing that's least official when he was candidate Trump had to do with the fake elector schemes and all of that. So that's all in there. But the stuff that kind of could go either way, I think primarily is the Mike Pence piece of this, the pressuring Mike Pence, because Mike Pence was in addition to being part of the executive branch and working as the vice president with Donald Trump, he was also candidate, right, on the same ticket. So he also acted in his private capacity, but he also acted as he has a ceremonial role per the Constitution to certify the election as the president of the Senate. And so Jack Smith took the position that he was either acting as candidate Pence or as the ceremonial legislative head or president of the Senate, and therefore part of the legislative branch. So that could be something, however, that Tanya Chutkan, the judge, is going to have to rule on whether Jack Smith made the right call or not. And that could happen through a mini trial, like an evidentiary hearing, or she could, and that's what I think will have to happen. I think they'll have to call witnesses and take testimony and do cross-examination and all of that to expand the record. Because unlike in the New York City case, the Manhattan DA case, that case had a full-blown trial, right? So that case has a full evidentiary record that Judge Merchan can rule on, and hopefully will rule on very soon, before the still scheduled sentencing September 18th. But his decision on that is due September 16th. So we'll see what happens in that case. But they have a full record where witnesses testified and were cross-examined, et cetera. But in the Judge Chutkan case, in the Washington, D.C. case, that hasn't happened yet. So I could see still a hearing or a mini trial on the Mike Pence stuff and some other things that were in there. But all the references to the Department of Justice stuff is out. And so what has to happen next now that there is a superseding or new indictment? So what a superseding indictment does is it literally takes the place of the old indictment. And the old indictment was around 45 pages long. This one's, I think, 36 pages long. So it's shorter. As I said before, they made some changes to it where they talked about where they sort of emphasized certain things, de-emphasized others, and made it comport with the Supreme Court decision. But it's essentially the same, right? This is January 6th. It's the pressuring the states to the fake, the misinformation that was spread, the fake electors, trying to get them to deliver fake electoral ballots, and also get Mike Pence to not certify the election, and that's what the emphasis is in this case. It's still a pretty powerful, sweeping indictment against Donald Trump, and it's amazing when you go back and reread it how egregious the conduct is, even without the Jeff Clark Department of Justice stuff in there. It's just outrageous and egregious to read about it and what Donald Trump did. So what has to happen next, though, is he has to be arraigned on this superseding indictment. Now, Jack Smith announced that he is okay if he doesn't mind or he agrees to waive the defendant's appearance for the arraignment. Let's see if the judge agrees and if the defendant agrees, or he could show up and use this as an opportunity to, speechify the way he does when he has to be in court. He's already freaking out about the superseding indictment because he is posting over and over and over and over again on social media. And he's doing that, like you can tell he's kind of panicking because he's doing so many posts. And one of the things he's citing is that this is within 60 days of the election, and that's, election interference. And why is that significant? Because there's a Department of Justice policy not to influence an election through your action. So, for example, if you have a pending investigation against a politician and you're about to make that case, if you're within about 60 days, it's a policy now, it's not a rule or a law. If you're within that time period, you're not supposed to do anything because that could impact or affect the outcome of an election. You should never do that. But this doesn't really apply here because he was already indicted. So, it's not like they're doing anything. They're not like bringing new charges. That I could see would be a problem. And P.S., it's not within the 60 days. Now, but what he says is it's within 60 days of early voting. Now, early voting, don't forget, that's the very thing that Donald Trump uses to say there was election fraud. He doesn't think there should be early voting or mail-in voting or anything else. He thinks people should have to be, jump through a million hoops of identification and go in person on a particular day and have to go through a gauntlet of MAGA election scary people who are going to try to intimidate, engage in voter intimidation, et cetera. That's the only vote that counts. But meanwhile, here he says, oh, but this what's in 60 days of early voting. Sorry, buddy, doesn't count. And P.S., this doesn't fall within that anyway. So he can say that all he wants, say it's election interference. This investigation, this prosecution is already ongoing. He's just superseding the indictment of the same charges, not new charges, the same charges. So it's not even close to anything that he's saying, but you can tell he's panicking by citing that. So the next thing that has to happen, like I said, is this arraignment, which should happen soon on this new indictment. I'm sure he'll plead not guilty again. And then comes the motion to dismiss on evidentiary grounds or whatever motion they're going to make on presidential immunity. And then Judge Chutkan will have to apply kind of the law to these facts. And I think she'll do so with an evidentiary hearing. So procedurally, this is all uncharted territory. Is she going to ask for motions first and then the hearing on the new indictment? Or is she going to have the hearing to develop the record and then have motions, or both? This is uncharted territory because this is brand new law that was created by the United States Supreme Court. So we'll see what she does. We'll see how it goes. But the very next thing that has to happen is he has to be arraigned. And so that will happen. And I'm sure he will, make a claim, that somehow, like I said, that this is illegitimate, et cetera, but that's how he is. Anyway, so the process of arraignment is in some ways very routine, but very important. That's where a judge informs the defendant of the charges. They enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, and conditions of release or security, being put in or not, et cetera, are talked about and done at that time. And then a motion schedule. So that's what has to happen next. And the case is proceeding. I don't think anything much is going to happen before the election. And we'll see. And of course, if he is reelected, this whole thing is moot because he will then be in charge of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice. And I'm sure he'll dismiss the case and pardon himself and others. But we'll see. I'm Karen Friedman Agnifilo, co-host of Legal AF and of Mistrial. So come to the MeidasTouch Network for all things law and politics. You heard it here first, and big news coming out of the Department of Justice.
Real quick, Meta just changed their algorithm to suppress political content. Please follow our Instagram at MeidasTouch right now as we head towards 400,000 followers so you don't miss a beat.